What's up, amigos? Today we're going to cover Fenrir G Premium. For the winning image and mindset, we're going to focus on three things: the multi-attack aspect, trigger stacking, and then the setup for the Ultima Turn as well. So with that being in mind, the key aspect with Fenrir G with our errata history collection stride Dione, we're able to generate attacks and also get some advantage. And what I mean by that is that our errata stride is essentially, if you have the Fenrir as your Vanguard, you can actually superior stride regardless of your opponent's grade, generate 2 force markers. We'll typically do force 1, but you could also do force 2. And then when the on hit skill actually procs off, you get to soul blast 3, check the top 3, add 1 to hand, and then soul charge the rest. So by itself, it doesn't really do much, but with the interaction of Fenrir is that when you stride with any Vanguard, that Vanguard itself will actually get the red tech skill, where if you soul blast at that turn once per turn, you can counter blast 1 and revive that unit. So that's how you can extend attacks during the battle phase. So that'll be our basis with the card choices moving forward, and I'll show off some combos as well. Also, quick note, I want to point this out that we're going to extend more multi-attack with this card such as laning. So we have multiple copies in the deck, and this essentially gives our Vanguard additional Fenrir-like skills. So that's how we're going to able to superior call multiple units during the battle phase and keep going as far as we can. So onto the grade 3s, we're playing 3 copies of Fenrir G. So again, when this unit is strode upon, you can soul charge 3. It's actually mandatory, and then your red tech skill is given to the Vanguard that you stride with. So this helps us set up for the main phase, but also with the battle phase, just like I mentioned. The GB2 skill doesn't really come up as often, and the reason that we play 3 copies is that we want to make sure that we ride this as a first unit, and then that's where really the Fenrir V version, you can ride this moving forward. So that way you can generate a third force marker, for example, but also have access to the revival skill even during your opponent's battle phase. So that way, if you need to revive something, destroy a rear guard, such as with Vanguard, we have that ability to do so. And this deck actually utilizes Vanguard a lot, so that's why we still play the 3-1 ratio. If the event you don't ride into this later, we do play Veritrum too, and also have access to phenomenal gear guards that can reduce crits. So there's another way of disrupting plays against your opponent as well. And just like I mentioned, we're playing 3 copies of Vanguard. So what's really cool about this card is that it helps with that multi-attack aspect, but also trigger stacking. So the 2 skills are very important. The first one is the retire skill. So on play, soul blast 1, retire something, and if it was on Vanguard circle, retire the entire field. So don't forget about that. Sometimes I can catch off people, especially against an Excel type of deck, and they fill up the board. You can get rid of the whole board that way too. So just keep that in mind. But the second skill is really where it's used most often. So at the end of the battle, this unit can go into soul, check the top 3, bottom deck 1, top deck 1, and then put 1 into soul. So you're filling up the soul that way, not only with a random sort of a dig deep into the 3 choice, but also itself. So later on, you can actually revive it and then do the skill again. So you can start seeing, you can start stacking your deck a little bit better. So it increases the chances to get triggers during your drive check. And so you want to make sure that you have the force markers onto 1 rigid circle, put this guy on there, and guess what? He's a 33k beater, right? And then he can come out repeatedly by the number of times that you can superior call him and keep stacking your deck. Not only that, but you want to do this after your Vanguard attacks too, kind of like close to the end of the turn. So that way you can stack your deck defensively as well. So you have drop PGs, you have the heal triggers, but you also have the errata crit triggers for Fenrir that act as draw triggers when damage checks. So you can actually stack your deck very well in a defensive manner, and then it makes it a lot easier to deal with some attacks, especially if you don't have access to the Hanali just yet in those like multi-attack aspect decks. It's just very helpful in that situation too. Onto the other grade 3s that we're running, we're playing 1 Forbidadal and 1 Uranus. And so Forbidadal allows us to grab any grade 3s or grade 4s from our decks, or even drop zone and add them to the field if they're grade 3s, or add them to hand if they're grade 4s. But for this deck, we're going to focus on grade 3s. So I wanted to add cards that help with value with that, and I really wanted to stay away from the Regalia engine, and we're so tempted to optimize that as much as we can, especially with Idrisil combined with Norm. I might consider using it back again later, but this build specifically was trying to get away from it, so I just wanted to let you know. So we're using a card such as Uranus, and Uranus on place, you can Soul Blast 2 and generate a force marker and put it onto your Vanguard circle. So if you want to go force 2 with Dione, so Dione can place those force markers onto the regard circles, and then if you have access to Uranus or Forbidadal to fetch it, you can get that third force 2 marker on the field. So essentially your whole front row is crit 2, moving forward. And so you may not have a lot of power, but if you're poking with crit 2 and then eventually you'll get triggers, especially if you're stacking them with Vanguard, then it makes it a lot more threatening, especially in the once you get them to 4 damage as well. And then that could also help with the Ultima Turn, because all the attacks are already like crit 2, and so if you check more criticals, they're going to be crit 4, crit 5, and so on with that, you know, depending on what you drive check, right? So that's one thing that I'm experimenting. And the other thing is that it doesn't use a counterblast. As you keep playing this stack, you'll be using counterblast, and we do have some counter charging, but this is a lot easier because we're using soul as a resource. For the remaining grade 3s, we're playing the grade 3 heals who want to survive. This can be used for the cost of the superior stride. It has to be a summation of the grade 3s or greater. So this helps a lot. And then, of course, we have access to Phenomenal G guards as well. You could also ride this later on because we do play the Ultima. That means we're not playing the OT, but you do require the same Vanguard name, essentially, on your Vanguard circle and the discard fodder. So this can be you write it and then discard an extra copy, and boom, you're an Ultima stride as well. Now to the grade 2s, you're probably seeing like Cadwalla on the thumbnail. So what does Cadwalla even do, essentially, for this deck? And it's really cool. It's a Cato Sanctuary card. So at the end of the battle that this unit attack, you can Soul Blast 1 and retire this unit, assuming that you also have a combination of 4 units on the field. So it includes itself and the Vanguard. And you check the top 3 and you add a grade 2 or greater to your hand. If not, you can shuffle the top 3 back and then you randomly draw a card after that. So in a way, you can start getting advantage back if you do call this from hand. But if you start superior calling this unit, you can see you can add +1s to your hand while you're increasing multi-attack. So you can start seeing Cadwalla as a way to keep chaining attacks. And what's really cool is that not only that you can Soul Blast the Vanguard to superior call it, you can Soul Blast another Cadwalla. And then you can keep chaining Cadwallas until you get to the point where, hey, it's time for my Vanguard call. And then at that point, you're really taking advantage of the force markers that are stacked onto the regular circle. So it's just a great card. Again, it's Soul Blast, and it generates advantage as well. And it's also 10k, so it still falls with the force base of grade 2s with 10ks, so that helps. We're also playing 4 copies of Gleipnir, and Gleipnir is a phenomenal card on grabbing pieces from your soul. It's very similar to Dione Turn, but I'll elaborate a little bit why I picked Gleipnir over Dione Turn. And so with Gleipnir, you're able to Counterblast, Soul Charge 1, and grab a card from your soul. This can be placed on Vanguard or Vanguard Circle, so it works either way. This is great to ride as your grade 2 Vanguard too, especially if you're going second, because you can get a defensive piece that way, especially if you Soul Charge, like, let's say, a heal or a sentinel or something. This grabs any card. That's the biggest thing that why I picked this card over Dione Turn. Dione Turn specifically grabs a client card, so in this case will be just Genesis cards. So you can't grab your Forbidden Dolls that get Soul Charged, your OTs if you do play it, but also your like Cato Sanctuary cards such as Cadwalla. And as I found myself playing testing, I was trying to grab certain key pieces like Cadwalla and then Forbidden Doll and so on, right? And so it just made sense to use Gleipnir. We do play Dreaming Dragon as the stand trigger that returns the entire drop zone back to deck, so we don't want deck out, but also Dione Turn was allowing us to also grab cards from our drop zone in that moment in time. But if we're going to shuffle back our drop zone anyway, Gleipnir kind of has that access, assuming that we're going to keep soul charging, which with Fenrir, every time you stride, you're going to soul charge 3 no matter what. So it really fluidly works out that well. But the other aspect that I really like about Gleipnir is the second skill. So on attack, you can Soul Blast 1 and give it 10k until the end of the turn. So 2 aspects. One, it's a Soul Blast during the battle phase. Again, you can chain attacks. So you can attack with your Vanguard first on the stacked marker Vanguard Circle, and then you can attack with Gleipnir to Soul Blast it, and you can get the Vanguard out again that way. Or you can do Vanguard first, go into Soul, then have your Vanguard attack, stack the triggers onto Gleipnir, then Gleipnir can attack and pop out the Vanguard that way. So you can do a couple options. But what's really cool too with the synergy is that if you do get a stand trigger in your drive checks, so what do I mean by that is that with Vanguard, if you trigger stack a stand trigger and you already know that it's coming, you can attack with Gleipnir next, get Soul Blast 1 to get the plus 10k, but don't revive just yet. And then when your Vanguard attacks, you'll Soul Blast 3, but also get the stand trigger, so you re-stand the Gleipnir again for another attack. And you can give the power to Gleipnir still, so it's a big unit on its own. But then when the Gleipnir attacks again, you can Soul Blast 1 more time and get another 10k. It's till the end of turn, so it stacks over time too. So this is how, with Taro being legal back in the day, this was why it was such a threatening card with that combination too. So the synergy is good. Just be mindful that it's on attack and not at the end of battle, because if you try to do this while you still have a standing unit and the force marker and you really want to take advantage of that, it can conflict with that. So the timing is imperative. And for the last of the grade 2s, we're playing 2 copies of Veritrum. Veritrum is a great defensive card. Again, you put this onto Guardian Circle, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 3, choose one of your opponent's standing rearguard circles or a rearguard circle with a standing unit, and then they call the top card of the deck on top of it. Essentially, you get rid of potential threatening pieces that way with a random card on top of the deck, and hopefully it's something less threatening. So be mindful of that. This is kind of cool too. Later on, especially when they're getting low on deck, you can potentially deck them out that way, especially if they're on like their last couple cards to like drive check. It's like they get to a point where they can get away with drive checks and having one card still left in deck. But if you pop this open, you can deck them out in that moment too. So that's cool. If you are in the Fenrir V, you can Soul Blast and trigger the Counterblast skill that way. So not only you're using Veritram's skill that way, but you could also revive the Vanguard to retire something on top of that. So you really mess up the formation as much as you can. And we're playing too because we want to primarily see the Cadwalas and the Gleipnirs. Our Vanaganders, they're also our front units, but they're also the key cards that we want to see ASAP. And then this deck also, you have to be mindful of Counterblast though, and then the soul that you're using. So that's why maybe just having two just to see in the mid to late game, that's fine. If you see this early on, there's other cards that we use, like such as Hanali, to help with the early game too. So it's not super crucial to see this card, but it can help if you just see it at that point. Onto the great ones. We're playing 4 copies of Austria of the Full Heavens. This is an old card from the original V series for Genesis, and so what it does essentially on Vanguard Circle or Rearguard Circle, you can place, draw a card, and bottom deck something. And if this was on the Vanguard Circle, you get to Soul Charge 2 as well. So this card helps fuel the soul, but it also helps kind of like deck and filter your card choices that you're looking for. Deck for those pieces, like your Fenrirs, for example. So that way your right consistency is solid, and then of course all the key pieces that you may be looking for, maybe defensively like a Hanali or a Veritram or a grade 3 heal. So it's kind of nice, but the second skill is really what made me think about this card again. And the second skill is at the end of the battle that it boosts it, you can Soul Blast 2 and return this card back to hand. Sure, it's nice that it bounces back for an additional shield or reusage, but it's Soul Blast 2 during the battle phase. So that way, if you don't have a Cadwala or you don't have a Gleipnir, you still have a card like a grade 1 that can boost anything and be able to Soul Blast and then trigger a revival skill that way too. So that's why I play 4 copies of Austria, because I do want to see it, and it was just one of those cards that I feel like this is actually pretty important. You could also use where if you go second, when you get the ticket shields, you can also grab a combo piece and then like bottom deck the lowest ticket shield. So that way you have all Genesis / Catter Sanctuary pieces in your hand as well. So the rest of the grade 1s are kind of like utility based / like necessities in a way, but you can only fit so much and you need a little bit of everything. And so a lot of these are basically played at 2. So the first card that's played at 2 is Skull, and Skull is really our grade 3 top 5 searcher. This helps with right consistency. This helps with grabbing Forbidadol, as well going second with grade 3 heals. So I appreciate the consistency boosted there. And then the second skill is where if you've Soul Blasted this turn, this gets an additional continuous 5k. So this is a 13k booster, 13k attacker. This pairs up nicely behind a Gleipnir because it makes that magic number 23 as well. So take advantage of that. And then if it's on the force marker by itself, it can hit 33k if need to, before you start like reviving stuff in its place too. And like I mentioned with the countercharge aspect, we are playing 2 copies of Claymore Harry, and Claymore Harry is an OG era card in the initial Genesis support as well. And essentially when you Soul Blast once per turn, you can essentially bottom deck one of those cards and countercharge. This is a GB1 skill. So one of the things I didn't like about this card was it was GB1, so it didn't happen till later on, but thanks to the errata collection, you're going to stride as soon as you get to grade 3. So this is even live earlier than expected, which is super nice. And then of course this can return triggers, so that way your deck's a lot more scarier as you properly filter that deck out as well. If you play 2 of these, you can actually countercharge 2 and return multiple cards that way. And what I like to do is that it works during the opponent's battle phase. So with Veritram, you can Counterblast and Soul Blast 3, but it'll see it, and you'll bottom deck one of those Soul Blasted cards, and guess what? You countercharge, so Veritram becomes a lot more freer in that sense, of course, though, yeah. Then we are playing 2 copies of Hanali. I was trying to find room for Hanalis for sure. Again, if you're using cards like Austria and Gleipnir, there's a way to like kind of dig for them in a way. You could also revive them later on with Fenrir skill or the Ladian skill too. So this is super helpful against like the XL matchups and then other decks that just really take advantage of the 5+ attacks. You need to survive essentially, and then you can remove this from field because of the errata as well, so you can still multi-attack without sacrificing too much of counterblasting. And then lastly, we're playing 1 copy of Sanctitude. So it's because in this format, more than likely you're going to see a Vanguard with the triple drive ability. This becomes a 1-card PG in essence as well. Now onto the grade zeros. We're playing the V starter. Again, you want to take advantage of the multiple ticket shields. We're also playing 3 copies of Lading. So this is what I was talking about, that you can have multiples of these in a single turn and you can get more battle phase revival that way. You could take advantage of this on any stride that you have too. And so if you have strides that soul blast and then you have the rear guard that can soul blast, you can really get revivals that way. This is also super helpful even on the Ultima turn, because you can do Ultima and have that crit pressure, and also maybe if you need to restand a field like with a stand trigger, you can. But then this adds another additional attack, especially if you have like a soul blasting unit that can really trigger that extra attack on the Ultima turn. So that way you can actually have a solid finish. But this is a really useful card. It's free, especially if you start using cards like Kadwala. You'll get your advantage back if you do call this from hand and start, like, you know, shoving them into soul. So be mindful on how you play those, but super helpful. We have 4 copies of the crit trigger for the Fenrir. Again, the Gadirata has the draw effect when damaged. You want to maximize on this. Genesis is still combo piece reliant, especially with Fenrir too, so the more pieces you have to work with, the easier it is to do your plays. Plus, there's no other ways to really generate massive advantage. It's a little bit +1 here and there every so if you can add to it, your hands become a healthy size to be able to withstand most decks. We're also playing 2 more crits, so 6 crit in total. This is the Stride Fighter crit. Again, you need a submission of the grade 3s or more, so these don't pop out as often when you do your superior stride. This is more into like later at that point too. And for the draw PGs, we're playing 3 because we play 1 Sanctitude, and if we're going to play draws, might as well make them the PG ones. So these are super helpful, both drive checks or damage checks. And then lastly, we're playing 3 copies of Dreaming Dragon. And this card is really needed and really useful in this build. With Fenrir in general, it accelerates soul charging. And if you're using other cards to also dig deeper too, you're going to deck out pretty quickly. So you want to make sure you don't deck out. You don't have to worry about it. This is why I also bumped it up to 3, so I don't have to like really search for it. Keep it in mind. Sometimes when you play 1 or 2 and you can try this, you'll realize that you're more cautious with it. And you also try to keep it in hand if you do have it in hand. So having the 3 is a lot more flexible, and you can use it ASAP if you really need to as soon as you hit the 10 and drop, because once you hit the 10 and drop, you get to draw a card back. So again, you get another +1 that way too. With the strides, I'll talk about the main ones and then kind of glance over some of the other ones that are kind of just filler for now. You want this for the extra ticket shield. It unlocks. Also gives you damage if they damage deny you in an aspect, so that's really nice. The Dione, you only need 2 copies because it depends on the force marker if you got it in this fight. So you just need 2. The win cons for this deck, and that's the 3rd bullet point for this video, is the Ultima Turn. And so if you're still curious what Ultima even does, is that essentially you can Ultimate Stride, Counterblast 2, search for 4 cards in your deck, and then you can essentially Superior Call 2, and then you stack the rest in any order. And essentially this way you can get your combo pieces, but you can stack critical triggers 9 times out of 10. You could also do stand triggers, heals, but more than likely you're going to do crits because you want to win that turn as well. So it's super vital, but you could also get combo pieces such as like Kadwala, Gleipnir, and so on to extend more attacks, especially because you do stride onto Fenrir as well. Keep in mind that if you're on Fenrir G, you could also use Fenrir V as a discard because technically they have the same name. So be mindful of that too. So that works for you as well. And then also you could have Lading in the mix. If it's in your hand, you can use it and just shove it into soul to get more superior calls that way. So this turn actually becomes really a win con in that sense too. You may be asking yourself, like, have you tried the new OTs, like the red and blue ones? And yeah, they kind of help, but I find out that most cases they end up soul charged. And so you can't really hard draw into them as well for like a defensive skill where you can just drop them as a 50k shield. So I felt like at this point, why not just have Ultima? Because this deck doesn't have a really super solid winning image. It kind of relies on multi-attack. It's not bad, but it's not great, like super bonkers. It's kind of like in the middle. And so that Ultima Turn is really that win con that can help us seal the deal. Another old school stride that we haven't seen in a while is the Vanguard that's great for. And keep in mind that the Vanguard in the main deck and in the G zone, you can play max copies of 4 each, even though they have the same name. And the reason is because they're different zones. You can look it up if you want to, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. That's how it works with Gear Chronicle. That's how it works with Aquaforce with the Lambroses too, as well. But this card is on attack Soul Blast 6, and you can actually gain the red tech skill that during the drive step, you can check the top 4, and you can bottom deck or top deck them in any order as much as you want to for that top 4, right? And so really, when you do the skill, your opponent has an option where they have to PG or they just take it. If you basically they try to bank it as high enough, you're going to break it if you know you can break it. Unless they really go really high in shield. That basically is almost like a PG. So it really puts them in that awkward position. But it's a strat that can also Soul Blast during the battle phase. But it also helps you with your triggers if you really need to see some critical triggers or some just pressure that way too. And another card that's useful is Muspel. So this is more of counter-charging aspect. It also has a Regalia name, so if you do want to play Idrisil with the Norm, you can squeeze those in and then have a restanding option as a Vanguard that way too. You don't have to play Minerva technically. Minerva also requires Regalia Soul Blast, and we're not playing the Soul Blast 3 Reducer, so you can't get away with that as easily. So that's why I would even recommend like maybe this Regalia instead. So you just have access to it, but it's not the full-blown Minerva example. But you could also just countercharge. So if you are kind of last tonight and there's no way to get around it, this can help you so that way you can keep going. We're also playing one Jagdagna. This card is solid. When your opponent places a Guardian, you can Soul Blast 3 to retire it, and then they call the top card essentially in its place. And so they do that for every Guardian that they place from hand, and so you can Soul Blast that many times, so you can trigger multiple revival skills that way. And also, it can make the opponent deck out to closer to that, especially if their deck size is low. That you can really take advantage of that. And then when it attacks, it will soul charge more cards. So that way you can soul charge Venegander or even Cadwallace that you could potentially revive during that same battle phase as well. So be mindful of that. And then these are the extras, really. The Marduk. If you can't strike, you can at least Marduk. Armaruda. The Counterblast and the crit is not bad, but this is more later on. You want to make sure you do Dione first so you're established, and then the Soul Blast 15 as well. It's doable actually because you do soul charge a good amount, but it's better to really just like go for different plays, especially if you can Ultima. And for the G guards, Iris you can soul charge any 3. Laura you can GB1 flip. If you do Dione and then you G guard with any G guards, you're already GB3, so you can Ultima your second stride technically that way. And again, your first striding is your first grade 3 turn, so it happens a turn sooner. So be mindful of that. And then the solid cards that we really rely on is Anavarada. This is where you can actually not only get shield, but also reduce the crit. So you can really stop a rearguard attack, but then you could also reduce the Vanguard's crit a lot. So you can just take the Vanguard and have no fear. Unless they somehow accumulate a lot of criticals that way. That's, you know, assessed at that point. And then 2 copies of Ear. This is where you can soul charge selectively 4 cards of 0 through 3 grades, essentially. And you'll be set up for the following turn. So I'm going to show off a ride progression, and essentially this is what our starting hand looks like. Let's say we're going first, and we're going to draw into turn. So for the grade 1s, we have a couple options. I'm going to do Austria. So first you're going to draw for that, then Austria skill, draw a card, and then we bottom deck a card. Luckily, we got our Fenrir too, so that's right off, back off the way. Since we're going first, we could put Claymore Hammer back just to have some shield value and also combo pieces. And then Soul Charge too, because we're in the Vanguard circle. So Gleipnir and Lading, not too bad, not too bad. With that being said, we'll also pass turn. And then if they attack us for that turn, they'll give us some damage. We have Gleipnir. And then goes to our turn. And we have another grade 3 heal. So for our grade 2s, we're going to ride Cadwalla in this case. So we're just 10k base. There's nothing really much we can do. So we're going to attack. And so our drive check reveals a heal trigger, so I guess we'll heal in this case actually. That works out. And then again, they'll go to the grade 2. Maybe give us like 2 damage. Oh, we got a Fenrir crit, so we get to draw. And then they'll give us another damage. Ooh, a Venegander. That's a combo piece. So then back to our turn, we're going into a grade 3 turn, and we have a couple options. So ride Fenrir G, obviously, and so let's take a second to slow down. So we do have Veneganders for options. I think I'm going to use both of them and discard a heal for the cost of Dione. So let's try Soul Charge 3. Oh, okay, combo pieces there. Okay. And stack the Force 1 marker in this case. Your Vanguard also gets the red tech skill to be able to revive during the battle phase. You're going to use Venegander. You can Soul Blast to retire something on their field. Let's say we just, something not useful. I guess the starter in that case. We can also do the second one and do the same thing for that one. Let's say the Gleipnir. Yeah, there we go. Also, a combo plays that we can do is we can have Divinity as well, since this is going to attack first, and then you can call Hanali. You can leave it behind your rearguard still as a booster. So if you believe that it will not get removed, you can leave it. But if you feel like it would get removed, then use the removal skill instead. So it's just really dependent at this point. We are just going to do 4 attacks in this case because there's no ways to extend more. So we're not going to have to worry about Hanali affecting us. So the first battle can be 33 boosted with 4k for 37 against their grade 2 Vanguard. Then skill, go into soul, check top 3. We got a couple options. We could do where we restand our rearguard to get another attack, and this is where I guess Hanali would contradict. We do have the Hanali, maybe we want to take advantage of the draw instead, so let's do that. And then soul charge the Dreaming Dragon so we can grab it later and bottom deck the other card. In this case, I won't use the Vidi because we're wanting to take advantage of the draw trigger, and we're going to stack it onto here. So a drive track, draw trigger, power here. Ooh, surprise, right? Second and then third. Oh, another draw trigger, power here, and draw a card. So Vanguard is plus 20k. And then this skill would proc Soul Blast, Vanguard, Nostria, and Elating. Then Counterblast 1. Revive Vanguard. Oh, wait. Dione skill. We're still doing a Dione skill. So check top 3. And then we get to add 1 card to hand. So let's say we add this for shield and also stride fodder and then soul charge the rest. And then Vanguard soul blast something to retire something. So at this point, you've already retired 3 cards as well. So in this example, we have 33 here, 33 as well because of the triggers. And the Vanguard's rested, of course. But this has a booster still. So this is going to attack next. This will go into the soul. Do the skill again. Let's stack again. Put Fenrir on top. Soul charge the Kadwala. Bottom deck the other card. 33 with the booster. And then the end of battle. Check top 3. Boom, there's a stand trigger. So let's say we stack a trigger and then we bottom deck and soul charge this card. This will go back. Unfortunately, we didn't take advantage of the crit because we knew that we're going to get a trigger at that point. So be mindful of that. It just happens. But if you feel like you want to draw a combo piece and then risk for the drive checks, you can do that too. Then let's say they attack us. There's +5, so our Vanguard's +5. Another damage. And guess what? We have a heal guard, so we're going to G-guard. And let's say we just do ear. Ear can soul charge 4 in this case. And then if you need a perfect guard, you can. And let's say we just get rid of the Hanali because we already have one there. So let's say we go to our turn and then draw a card. Okay, in this case, we did not get a Fenrir to Ultima, but I will show it off. Yeah, let's say instead of that, we'll put this back just for the sake of the video. So we'll ultimate stride the Ultima. Soul charge. So a couple things you could do. You could do Fenrir skill first to soul charge and give the skill, or you could do Ultima skill. So if you know for sure that you need to call certain pieces, you may want to do Ultima, but then you risk to soul charge the stack that you have. So it's a pros and cons kind of type of deal. So let's do Fenrir first in soul charge and hope for the best. Okay, that wasn't bad. And then Ultima, Counterblast 2. And then let's look for the 4 cards. So you can really take advantage of Uranus for another force marker. And you could do a Elating, actually. Let's stack double crit. Call it this way. Now there's a reason why I'm doing this as well. So then that Soul Blast 2, these 2. This goes onto the Vanguard as well. So in this case, we're going to do Elating to get the revival skill on top of that. Then we'll call Gleipnir, but no skill. And be careful with cards such as Skull, because when placed, they just do it, so that messes up your stack. Also, Austria, this will mess up your stack because you draw into it as well. So be mindful of those types of skills. So let's say we just leave it as this. Since we stack critical triggers, we're just going to flat out attack with the Vanguard first, and then boom, crit everything plus 10k and a crit to everything. Another crit as well. This 20k for the whole form for everything, and then a Veritrum. So this everything is minimum crit 3. So the next thing you can do is attack this. Remember, they all got the power, so this is 33 plus 20, 53. Then Gleipnir boosted on attack Soul Blast 1, and this is where you can start chaining attacks with Kadwala. And then use Elating skill to revive it for free. And then this gets plus 10k in addition as well. So this is plus 20, so plus 40 to the column. This is 26, so 66k. Crit 3. Then Kadwala is 30k. If you want to make a magic number, you can boost it with this to make 34k. skill, since there's 4 units, you can Soul Blast 1. Oh, you want to Soul Blast the card you want to revive too. So in this case, let's do Vanguard. Retire, check the top 3. Actually, if we live, Ultima burns our entire G zone, so we cannot G-guard. So I guess I'll just add this to hand for shield and hope for the best for a heal trigger later on, if that's the case. And then Counter Blast 1 to revive it. So we got Vanguard back to the field, and then if you want to retire something, you can. So Soul Blast and retire something. And this is another 33k. And then this will go into Soul, and then you trigger stack. And you want to set up with the defensive, if that's the case. Yeah, something like that. It doesn't matter. So at this point, remember the attacks were high critical, but you also multi-attack to extend more. Took advantage of the force markers to give you more power as well. And your hand size still ended with a decent hand size too. And you got the combo pieces that you really needed to. You had like a lot of the combo pieces in the Soul as well, so that way you can keep going and extending attacks, which we did. And that's the deck profile, amigos. I hope you enjoyed it. Fenrir is really fun and it's close to my heart, so that's why I wanted to revisit this deck, especially with the erratas from History Collection. So I hope you're having as much fun as I am. But also you can tweak this build to your preference. Like I said, you can add the Regalia engine if you want and change that up a little bit. You could also experiment with different cards that I didn't even think of that way. Or you can use Fenrir Mary as kind of like its own engine to be able to have that stride first, going first, but then like going second. It's an entirely different build. Let me know in the comments what you think too. I'd love to hear your feedback and also engage with the community. And if you want to support the channel, use the affiliated links down below in the description for a 50 card shop, TCG player, trading card mint, card trader 0. Feel free to book a Metafy session if you want a one-on-one experience on coaching as well. Or if you just want to read supplemental material, feel free to get the book How to Win Cardfight Tournaments. You can get it for free for an Audible trial if you want for an audiobook as well. Thanks, amigos. Until the next time. Bye.